The evening lights glowed softly across New Horizons Station as people moved through the wide corridors going about their business. The station floated at the edge of human space where Earth's people met with dozens of alien races to trade and talk. Officer Danny Carter walked his usual route through Section 7, checking the shops and making sure everything stayed peaceful. He had done this job for 3 years now and knew these halls better than his own quarters. The shops had closed an hour ago and most people had gone home for the night. That was why Danny noticed the old man sitting alone on the metal bench outside the locked storefronts. The man looked to be in his 70s with silver hair and dark skin that showed he had lived a long life under many suns. He wore plain clothes, nothing fancy, and sat with his hands folded in his lap, watching the few remaining people walk past. Danny had seen plenty of people in this station during his years of service. He knew the difference between someone resting and someone who might cause trouble. This old man seemed harmless enough, but station rules were clear about loitering in closed commercial areas after the shops shut down. Too many thieves had used the excuse of resting to case the stores before breaking in later. Danny walked up to the bench with the firm bouffant his training had taught him. The man looked up at Danny with calm eyes that held no fear or guilt. Danny spoke in his official voice, the one he used when enforcing station regulations. He told the old man that this area was closed to the public after 2200 hours, and he needed to move along right now. The old man replied in a quiet voice, saying he was simply resting and would move shortly. His tone was polite, but he made no effort to stand up. Danny felt his patience starting to wear thin. He had dealt with difficult people before, people who thought the rules did not apply to them just because they had some excuse. He told the man again that he needed to move now, and that station regulations were very clear about this. The old man let out a small sigh but still did not get up from the bench. He said something that made Danny more annoyed. The man claimed he had been walking these corridors since before Danny was born, and that he knew the regulations just fine. Danny did not like that response. It sounded like the old man was trying to pull rank or make Danny feel young and stupid. He warned the man one more time, saying if he did not stand up and show identification right now, Danny would have no choice but to arrest him for trespassing and failure to comply with lawful orders. The old man studied Danny for a long moment with those calm, intelligent eyes. Then slowly, very slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. Danny's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. His training had drilled into him that sudden movements could mean danger, especially on a station where some alien visitors could turn violent without warning. The old man noticed the reaction and spoke softly, telling Danny to take it easy and that he was just getting his identification card. He pulled out a simple ID card and held it out for Danny to scan. Danny took the card and ran it through his handheld scanner. The name read Marcus Webb with a basic citizen registration number, but something strange happened when the scanner tried to read the security clearance level. The screen showed errors and corrupted data that Danny had seen before with forged or expired documents. In his experience, this usually meant trouble. Either the person had fake papers or they were refugees from the outer colonies using stolen credentials to get better treatment. Danny made his decision. He told Marcus Webb to stand up because he was coming to the security office for verification. The old man asked if that was really necessary, but he was already rising from the bench, moving carefully like his bones hurt. Danny told him to put his hands behind his back. As Danny applied the restraint cuffs, a small crowd started to gather. A few humans and some curious aliens stopped to watch what was happening. Danny felt their eyes on him, but he kept his professional manner. He had followed every rule correctly. He had given warnings and escalated properly according to his training. The old man had failed to comply with a lawful order, and his identification showed suspicious anomalies. Everything Danny did was by the book. As they walked toward the security office, Marcus Webb spoke quietly, suggesting that Danny verify his clearance through Central Command, rather than the local station system. Danny did not respond to that. Everyone always had some excuse or some special reason why they should be treated differently. He had learned not to listen to every story people told him. The protocol would sort out who this man really was once they got him processed at the security office. What Danny Carter did not know, could not have known, was that this simple arrest was about to change everything. The man walking quietly beside him in restraints was not just some random old civilian trying to avoid station rules. He was someone whose name appeared in history books, someone whose decisions had shaped the laws that Danny thought he was enforcing. Someone who had spent nearly 50 years making sure that justice meant something in human space. Marcus Webb was the former Chief Justice of the Unified Terran Court, the highest legal authority humanity had ever created. He had written the framework for how humans interacted with alien species. He had ruled on cases that determined the rights of colonists and the limits of government power. He had mediated disputes between Earth and Mars, between the inner planets and the outer settlements. He had helped create the very concept of law that governed life on stations like New Horizon. And now he was walking through the corridors in restraints, arrested for the crime of being tired and sitting on a bench. The irony would have been amusing if it were not so troubling. But Marcus Webb said nothing about who he was. He had learned long ago that pulling rank rarely taught the lessons that needed teaching. Sometimes the universe handed you a moment that could educate people better than any lecture or law. Sometimes you had to let events play out to their natural conclusion. So he walked quietly beside the young officer, letting Danny Carter do his job, even though that job was being done to the wrong person for the wrong reasons. Behind them, the crowd whispered and pointed. Someone would certainly record what they saw and post it to the station network. By tomorrow morning, this story would spread beyond New Horizon Station. It would reach Earth and Mars and every colony world in between. The arrest of Marcus Webb would become news that echoed across human space. But for now, in this moment, it was just an old man and a young officer walking through corridors lit by artificial stars, heading toward a security office where everything was about to change forever. The security office sat in a reinforced section near the central hub of New Horizon Station, where the walls were thicker and the doors were made of heavy steel that could withstand almost anything. Officer Danny Carter guided Marcus Webb into the processing room, while his partner, Officer Lisa Grant, sat down at her desk to begin the paperwork. The room smelled like recycled air and the coffee that someone had burned earlier in the shift. Lisa looked up from her datapad and asked the old man his name in a bored voice. Marcus Webb answered calmly, giving his full name without any emotion. Danny handed Lisa the identification card, telling her that his scanner had flagged anomalies in the security clearance codes and that the credentials were probably expired or forged. Lisa took the card and swiped it through her more advanced reader, which had better processors than the handheld scanners the patrol officers carried. Her expression changed from routine boredom to confusion as she stared at her screen. She said something was strange because the system kept having trouble reading the security classification, and it was trying to access restricted databases that required special authorization. Danny felt satisfied hearing that because it confirmed what he had suspected from the beginning. He told Lisa she should run the identification through Central Command like the old man had suggested, and let them deal with the fraud charges. Marcus Webb spoke up from where he sat with his hands still in restraints behind his back. He mentioned that he would appreciate if they did that verification sooner rather than later, because he had an appointment in 2 hours that he preferred not to miss. Danny almost laughed out loud at that statement. He told the old man that he was looking at processing time and verification checks and potential criminal charges. There was no way he would be making any appointments tonight. Marcus Webb replied with just 2 words, saying they would see. His tone carried what Danny interpreted as completely misplaced optimism. Lisa initiated the secure connection to Earth Central Command, which was the main government system back on the homeworld. She input Marcus Webb's identification number in the flagged security codes, then sent the quantum encrypted signal through several relay stations on its journey back to Earth. She told Danny that this might take a few minutes because Central Command verification was not instant. Danny nodded and turned his attention back to Marcus Webb, asking him to explain what he was doing in a restricted area. After hours, while they waited for the system to respond, Marcus Webb gave the same answer as before, saying he was just resting because he was not as young as he used to be, and the station corridors were longer than they looked. Danny asked where he had been coming from. Marcus Webb said he had been at the diplomatic quarter attending a reception for the Krell ambassador. Danny and Lisa exchanged glances at that answer. The Krell were one of humanity's most important allies in this part of space. They were massive beings from a high-gravity world who stood nearly 8 feet tall with natural armor plating and strength that could bend steel. Their diplomatic functions were strictly invitation-only affairs that normally only high-ranking officials and important dignitaries could attend. Danny asked if Marcus Webb seriously expected them to believe he had attended a Krell diplomatic reception. Marcus Webb confirmed that he had and added that Ambassador Thrak was an old friend of his. He said they had been discussing revised trade protocols between their two peoples. Danny was about to say something dismissive when Lisa's console suddenly chimed with an incoming priority message. Her face went completely white as she looked at the screen. She told Danny he needed to see this right now. The tone in her voice made Danny move quickly to her side. What he saw on the display made his stomach drop like someone had just opened an airlock. The response from Central Command was not the standard verification data he expected. Instead, the screen was covered with red priority flags and security warnings. There was also a direct communication request from someone whose rank and position made Danny feel like his knees might give out. Admiral Patricia Hayes appeared on the screen. She was the commander of sector operations, which meant she oversaw everything that happened in this entire region of space. Her expression looked like she wanted to reach through the screen and strangle someone. She demanded to know which one of them had arrested Marcus Webb without even saying hello first. Danny's mouth went completely dry. He managed to identify himself as Officer Danny Carter and explained that he had made the arrest because Marcus Webb was loitering in a restricted commercial zone after hours, and his identification showed clearance anomalies. Admiral Hayes closed her eyes for a moment like she was praying for patience. Then she asked Danny if he had bothered to check what those anomalies actually were before putting restraints on Marcus Webb. Danny explained that the anomalies indicated corrupted or forged credentials, and that standard protocol required detention for suspicious identification. Admiral Hayes called Danny a fool. She told him that those were not corrupted credentials at all. The reason his scanner could not read them properly was because they were classified at the highest level of human government. She explained that Marcus Webb was not some vagrant or criminal. He was the former Chief Justice of the Unified Terran Court. He had helped write half the laws that Danny thought he was enforcing. The room seemed to spin around Danny as those words sank into his brain. He looked at Marcus Webb, who sat quietly with an expression of patient resignation on his weathered face. The former Chief Justice, the man who had presided over the court that established humanity's entire legal framework in space. The same man whose rulings had shaped everything from colonial rights to alien treaty law to how human governments could exercise power over their citizens. Danny had arrested that man for sitting on a bench. Admiral Hayes was still talking, and her voice cut through Danny's shock like a laser. She told him that Marcus Webb had not identified himself because he should not have needed to identify himself. The man had served humanity for 47 years. He should not have to justify his presence on a station that existed because of the legal framework he helped create. She ordered Danny to remove the restraints immediately and issue a formal apology. Then she said she would be filing a report about this incident, and it would reach the highest levels of command. The communication terminated, leaving Danny and Lisa staring at each other in complete horror. Danny turned to Marcus Webb with shaking hands as he fumbled with the restraint release mechanism. He tried to apologize, calling him Chief Justice Webb and saying he had no idea who he was. Marcus Webb rubbed his wrists where the restraints had pressed into his skin. He told Danny that he had been doing his job and following protocol. Perhaps not with the discernment one might hope for, but following the rules nonetheless. He stood up and adjusted his jacket with calm dignity. Then he made a comment about the irony of being detained under laws he had helped write. His tone was not angry, just sad and a little bit amused in a way that made Danny feel even worse about everything. News traveled faster than light on New Horizon Station, thanks to the quantum communication networks that connected every part of human space. Within 1 hour of Marcus Webb walking free from the security office, every major news feed across hundreds of worlds carried the story. The headlines were different depending on who wrote them, but they all said basically the same thing. A decorated former Chief Justice had been arrested for loitering while being black. In his modest quarters aboard the station, Marcus Webb sat in a comfortable chair reviewing diplomatic notes for his upcoming meetings. He seemed completely unbothered by the chaos swirling around his name across the galaxy. He had lived through enough genuine crises during his long life to recognize manufactured drama when he saw it. Right now he had more important work to focus on than worrying about news stories. A soft chime sounded at his door. Marcus opened it to find Commander Harrison Brooks standing at attention in the corridor. Brooks commanded the entire station, and his weathered face showed visible distress. He told Marcus that he could not adequately express how deeply sorry he was for what had happened. Officer Carter had been suspended pending a full investigation, and Brooks promised that appropriate disciplinary measures would be taken. Marcus invited Brooks inside and gestured to a chair, telling him to sit down and relax. He also mentioned that he had retired from the bench 8 years ago, so Marcus would do just fine instead of all the formal titles. Brooks perched uncomfortably on the edge of the seat, clearly not relaxed at all. He asked if there was anything he could do to make this situation right, and whether Marcus needed any special accommodations. Marcus surprised him by asking about Officer Carter instead. He wanted to know about Danny's record and his character. He wanted to understand who this young man was beyond the unfortunate encounter they had experienced. Brooks looked genuinely surprised but pulled up Carter's personnel file on his datapad. He explained that Danny Carter was 28 years old, with 3 years of service on New Horizon Station. His record was completely clean, with multiple commendations for handling difficult situations with alien visitors. Brooks added that Danny was actually one of their better officers, which made this incident even more inexplicable. Marcus asked what Danny's background had been before coming to the station. Brooks scrolled through the file, saying that Danny had worked colony security on Mars for 2 years before that. He had grown up on Europa Station, where his working-class family had struggled to make ends meet. Danny had put himself through the police academy without any help. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He told Brooks that Danny did not sound like a bad officer at all, just someone who had made a judgment call based on limited information and rigid adherence to protocol. Brooks said that was a very charitable interpretation. Marcus replied that he had spent his entire life interpreting law and human behavior. Officer Carter had seen an elderly man of a certain appearance sitting in a restricted area. His training had told him exactly what to do, and he had done it. The failure was not entirely Danny's fault. Brooks frowned in confusion, asking what Marcus meant by that. Marcus explained that the failure was in a system that did not adequately account for nuance. Humanity had built rigid protocols to handle interactions with dozens of alien species, and some of those species could be quite dangerous. But in creating those protocols, they had forgotten how to exercise judgment with their own people. Carter had followed his training perfectly. The question was whether that training actually served humanity well. Before Brooks could respond, another chime sounded at the door. This visitor was even more unexpected. Ambassador Thrak of the Krell Dominion stood in the doorway. His massive frame nearly filled the entire space. The Krell stood almost 8 feet tall, and his body was covered in natural armor plating that gleamed under the corridor lights. His voice came through a translation device, telling Marcus that he had heard about the insult offered tonight. He declared that this situation could not be allowed to stand. Marcus sighed and called Thrak his friend. He tried to explain that it was just a misunderstanding and nothing more than that. Thrak's mandibles clicked together in what Marcus recognized as Krell indignation. The ambassador asked how it could be called a misunderstanding when Marcus had been detained like a common criminal. Marcus was the one who had ensured justice for the Krell people when they first encountered humanity. This officer must face serious consequences. Brooks stood up quickly, trying to assure the ambassador that the matter was being handled through proper channels. Marcus interrupted, telling Thrak to sit down and suggesting that Brooks might want to stay for this conversation. The three of them settled into chairs, creating an unlikely scene. A retired human judge, a station commander, and an alien ambassador representing one of humanity's most powerful allies all gathered in a small apartment to discuss what should happen next. Marcus poured glasses of water for himself and Brooks. He also prepared a bowl of mineral solution that Krell consumed as refreshment. Then he began to speak. He told both of them something important. In his 47 years on the bench, he had witnessed humanity's greatest triumphs and its worst failures. He had seen humans extend legal rights to artificial intelligences. He had watched them negotiate peace with former enemies. He had helped build a framework of law that now spanned hundreds of worlds. But he had also seen how easily humans forgot their own principles when faced with fear or uncertainty. He took a sip of water and continued. Tonight was not special or unusual. Tonight was ordinary. An officer had seen someone he perceived as a potential threat and followed his training. The fact that he was wrong about the threat did not necessarily make him a bad officer. It just made him human with all the flaws that came with being human. Thrak quoted a Krell saying, "One who crushes a seedling while hunting cannot claim surprise when the forest grows sparse." Marcus agreed completely. If they destroyed Carter's career over this incident, they would be crushing a seedling. But if they used this moment to examine their training protocols and their assumptions, Then perhaps some good could come from what happened. Brooks looked between them, saying that with respect the media would destroy them if they did not show decisive action. People were already calling this everything from racial profiling to gross incompetence. Marcus told him to let them say whatever they wanted. He had weathered worse storms in his life. What mattered was what they actually did, not what they appeared to do for the cameras. Thrack observed that Marcus was suggesting education over punishment. He said this was very human and very much like Marcus. Marcus asked if that quality was not what made humanity worth befriending in the first place. The Krell ambassador made a sound like grinding stones, which Marcus had learned was how Krell laughed. Thrack agreed and said he would make a statement supporting Marcus's position. He wanted the galaxy to see that the Krell stood with human justice, not human vengeance. Danny Carter sat alone in a cold interview room with nothing but his thoughts and the knowledge that his career was probably over. The suspension had come within minutes of releasing Marcus Webb, followed by orders to remain available for questioning. He had been sitting here for hours now, replaying every moment of the encounter in his mind, trying to find where everything had gone so terribly wrong. The door opened and Danny expected to see Commander Brooks or maybe an internal affairs investigator, ready to end his career officially. Instead, Marcus Webb walked into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. He asked if he could sit down. Danny jumped to his feet, stammering that Marcus should not be here, and that if anyone found out there would be serious trouble. Marcus said calmly that if people found out, then they would know he was speaking with the officer who had arrested him. He set down the coffee cups and told Danny to sit, because he looked like he needed the caffeine more than Marcus did. Danny sat slowly, feeling like his brain could not process what was happening. This was not standard procedure. None of this made any sense at all. Marcus began by saying he wanted to understand something. He asked Danny to walk him through his thought process from earlier that evening. When Danny had first seen Marcus sitting on that bench, what exactly had he seen? Danny swallowed hard before answering. He explained that he had seen an elderly civilian in a restricted area after hours. Someone who might be lost or might be looking at the closed shops to plan a theft for later. The station had experienced problems with certain types of people. Marcus prompted him, gently asking what types of people. Danny struggled with his answer. He admitted they had problems with vagrants and refugees from the contested colonies. Some of them turned to crime out of desperation. Then he looked Marcus in the eyes and swore he had not been making assumptions about race. Marcus asked if Danny was certain about that. His tone held curiosity rather than accusation. He told Danny to be honest with him, but more importantly, to be honest with himself. When Danny had seen a black man sitting alone in that corridor, had it really never crossed his mind that the man might actually belong there? Danny wanted to deny it instantly. The easy lie formed on his tongue, ready to protect what remained of his dignity. But something about Marcus Webb's calm expectation of truth made lying impossible. Danny said he did not know for certain. Maybe he had made some assumptions. The refugees they'd had problems with came mostly from outer colonies. A lot of them looked like Marcus. He trailed off, feeling shame color his face red. Marcus finished the thought for him, saying they looked like him. He told Danny it was all right because recognizing bias was the first step toward addressing it. Then Marcus asked if Danny knew why those outer colonies had such high populations of black colonists. Danny guessed it might be economic opportunity. Marcus said that was partially correct. But the real reason was that the initial colony grants had deliberately targeted minority populations. The theory had been that people who faced discrimination on Earth might be more willing to risk frontier life. It was supposed to empower them. Instead, it created a new pattern where minorities got sent to the most dangerous and least developed regions. Then everyone acted surprised when those regions produced desperate refugees. Marcus explained that he had ruled on several cases involving those grant programs during his time on the bench. He had tried to ensure fairness, but the system had too much momentum. Centuries of Earth's racial dynamics did not disappear just because humanity spread across the stars. Danny felt something shift in his understanding. He said that when he saw Marcus on that bench, he was not just seeing a person. He was seeing the end result of a whole complex system he had never even thought about. Marcus agreed completely. He said what troubled him most was that Danny had followed his training perfectly. Danny saw what he was trained to see and acted as he was trained to act. That was not individual failure. That was systemic failure built into how humanity prepared its officers. Danny spoke quietly, saying he still made the choice to arrest Marcus. Marcus had asked Danny to verify through Central Command first. Danny could have done that before putting anyone in restraints. Marcus acknowledged that was true. He said that choice was on Danny and Danny alone. But Marcus wanted Danny to understand something crucial. He was not here to absolve Danny of responsibility or to condemn him either. He was here because he believed Danny could learn from this experience. Danny looked up sharply, asking what Marcus meant. Marcus explained that he had reviewed Danny's service record carefully. 3 years of solid work, multiple commendations for cultural sensitivity when dealing with alien species. Danny was not a bad officer, and more importantly, he was not racist. He was simply a product of a system that had not adequately prepared him for the nuances of human interaction in a multi-species environment. Marcus leaned forward, speaking earnestly. Humanity had spent so much time training officers to handle dangerous aliens that they forgot to train them to see their own people clearly. They built elaborate protocols for beings who might literally eat humans, but they did not build protocols for recognizing that a tired old man on a bench might have perfectly good reasons for being there. Danny asked what would happen to him now. His career was finished, was it not? Marcus said that depended entirely on Danny himself. Commander Brooks wanted to fire him. The media wanted his head on a spike. Even some of Marcus's colleagues thought Danny should face criminal charges for violating civil rights. Danny asked what Marcus wanted. Marcus smiled slightly and said he wanted Danny to become the officer he was capable of being. He wanted Danny to take this moment and this mistake and let it teach him something valuable about judgment and humanity and the responsibility that came with wearing a uniform. Marcus stood preparing to leave. He told Danny that he had a choice now. He could let this incident define him as a failure, or he could let it refine him into something better. Marcus planned to recommend that Commander Brooks reinstate Danny after completing a comprehensive training program that Marcus would design specifically for this station. What Danny did with that opportunity would be completely up to him. Danny felt his throat tighten with emotion. He asked why Marcus would do that for him after what Danny had done. Marcus replied that 47 years of administering justice had taught him something vital. Punishment without rehabilitation was just revenge. Revenge might feel good temporarily, but it did not make anyone better. It just made people feel satisfied while real problems continued. Marcus paused at the door before leaving. He said that Danny was not the only person who needed to learn from tonight. Everyone did, including Marcus himself. The incident at New Horizons Station stopped being just a human problem within 48 hours. Every major alien government in the sector issued statements or filed formal inquiries or sent diplomatic messages asking what had happened. The response from across the galaxy revealed something humanity had not fully understood until now. Marcus Webb's reputation extended far beyond human space into alien worlds and cultures that most humans had never even heard of. In the council chamber of the Galactic Trade Assembly, an emergency session had been called to discuss the matter. Representatives from 47 different species gathered either in person or through holographic projection. All of their collective attention focused on the human delegation, who stood at their podium looking extremely uncomfortable. Ambassador Helen Porter represented humanity at this session. She had served in the diplomatic corps for 20 years, handling all sorts of difficult situations. But nothing in her extensive training had prepared her for this particular humiliation. She was about to discuss her own species' internal failings in front of the assembled powers of known space. She began by acknowledging the concerns that had been raised regarding the treatment of former Chief Justice Marcus Webb. Humanity recognized that this incident reflected very poorly on their commitment to the principles of justice and equality that they claimed to value above all else. Before she could continue, Ambassador Thrak rose from his seat. His massive Krell frame commanded immediate attention from everyone in the chamber. The assembly recognized him formally. Thrak said he spoke not to condemn humanity, but to provide context that many present might be lacking. Marcus Webb was not merely a retired judge. He was the architect of the first contact protocols that had guided peaceful interaction between humans and Krell for 3 generations. Thrak gestured with one of his massive claws as he explained the history. When the Krell people first encountered humanity, they had nearly gone to war. Krell warriors had destroyed a human mining colony on a world the Krell considered sacred ground. Revenge had seemed inevitable on both sides. But Marcus Webb, who was then just a junior judge, had crafted a framework for restitution that honored both Krell spiritual claims and human economic needs. He had saved thousands of lives on both sides of the conflict. The chamber filled with interested murmurs. Many species knew about the Krell-Human Peace Treaty, but few knew its actual origins. Thrak continued speaking. This man, Marcus Webb, had given the Krell people justice when they had offered humans only destruction. And yet his own people had detained him for the crime of resting while elderly. This paradox demanded explanation from the human delegation. The Velocian representative spoke next. Velocians were beings of pure energy contained in crystalline matrices. The Velocian shimmered as it communicated through translation devices. It said that Justice Webb had mediated the dispute between Velocians and humanity over mining rights in the Deneb sector. His ruling had prevented what could have been a devastating conflict. The Velocians found it deeply troubling that such a figure would be treated as a common criminal by his own species. Ambassador Porter felt the weight of galactic attention pressing down on her like physical force. She tried to explain that the incident was the result of a single officer making a mistake. The Arcturan delegate interrupted her. Arcturans were known throughout the galaxy for their logical precision and lack of emotion. The delegate asked if it really was just one officer, or if it was the result of systemic patterns within human society. The Arcturans had studied human history extensively. Humans carried ancient prejudices with them into the stars. The bluntness of that statement sent shockwaves through the human delegation. Porter knew she had to be equally direct in response. She admitted that the Arcturan was correct. Humanity did carry those prejudices into space. They were working to address the problems, but they would not pretend the problems did not exist. That would be dishonest, and dishonesty served no one. A new voice entered the debate, surprising everyone present. Through a secure channel, Marcus Webb himself joined the session via holographic projection. He appeared standing beside Porter at the human podium. He greeted the assembled delegates and said he appreciated the concern they had shown. Many of them he counted as personal friends, and their loyalty honored him deeply. But he needed to speak plainly about something important. His arrest had not been an aberration or unusual event. It was a symptom of deeper issues that humanity needed to address honestly. He paused, letting his words settle into the minds of delegates from dozens of worlds. For centuries, his people had struggled with divisions based on superficial characteristics like skin color. They had made progress over time, significant progress in many ways. But progress was not the same as perfection or completion. When humans expanded into space, they thought distance and new frontiers might heal those old wounds. Instead, they had simply spread the wounds across a larger canvas. But Marcus wanted the assembly to understand something crucial. The officer who arrested him was not a villain or a monster. He was a young man trying to do his job in a complex environment. He was using training that had not adequately prepared him for the nuances of human diversity. His failure was also humanity's failure as a society to properly educate and prepare its people. The Velocian representative glowed more intensely, asking if Marcus was defending the person who had wronged him. Marcus replied that he was defending the possibility of growth and change. Punishment might feel satisfying in the moment, but education created lasting change. If they destroyed this officer's career, they would get a brief moment of righteous satisfaction. If they taught him and reformed the system that created his blind spots, they would prevent this from happening to other people in the future. Thrak made the grinding sound that served as Krell laughter. He said this was exactly why the Krell respected Marcus Webb so deeply. Marcus sought to heal problems rather than simply harm the people involved. Very well. The Krell Dominion would support humanity's efforts to address these systemic issues. But those efforts needed to be genuine and measurable, not just empty promises. Other delegates began voicing similar sentiments and offers of help. The Arcturans offered to share their conflict resolution protocols. The Velocians proposed a cultural exchange program to help human officers better understand their own diversity by seeing it through alien perspectives. What could have been a complete diplomatic disaster was transforming into an opportunity. Marcus Webb had somehow turned his personal humiliation into a teaching moment for multiple species across the galaxy. Ambassador Porter felt a surge of pride in her own species, and particularly in the man standing beside her as a hologram. This was humanity at its best, acknowledging failures honestly, seeking improvement actively, refusing to let shame prevent growth and learning. As the session concluded, Marcus addressed the assembly one final time. He told all the species represented that they had seen humanity's flaws on full display today. Humanity was not asking for forgiveness or sympathy. They were asking for continued partnership as they worked to become the society they genuinely aspired to be. He asked them to judge humanity not by this single incident, but by how they responded to it going forward. The chamber erupted in various forms of approval, with each species showing support in their own cultural manner. The Krell drummed their claws against the metal floor. The Velocians pulsed with harmonious patterns of light. Even the usually stoic Arcturans inclined their heads in acknowledgement. Humanity had been tested before the galactic community. While they had not been acquitted or forgiven, they had been given something perhaps more valuable: the chance to prove they could learn from their mistakes and become better. 3 weeks after his arrest, Danny Carter found himself sitting in a classroom that he had helped convert from an old cargo bay. The space now held rows of chairs and holographic displays, and an impressive collection of guest speakers that represented the most ambitious training initiative New Horizons Station had ever attempted. Danny was not alone in the room. Commander Brooks had made the training mandatory for every security officer on the station, both current personnel and anyone who would join in the future. What had started as punishment for one officer's mistake had evolved into something far bigger and more important. Marcus Webb stood at the front of the converted cargo bay. He was no longer the detained suspect, but instead the architect of something new and potentially transformative. Behind him, holographic displays showed scenes from throughout human history. Segregated facilities on Earth where people had been separated by skin color. Colonial uprisings on Mars where settlers had fought against unfair treatment. The first contact incident with the Krell that had nearly resulted in interspecies war. Marcus began speaking to the assembled officers. Over the next 6 weeks, they would explore something that should have been part of their initial training, but had been completely left out: the complexity of human interaction in a multi-species environment. This program was not about political correctness or checking boxes on a form. It was about making them genuinely better officers. He gestured to the historical images behind him. All of them had been trained extensively on alien cultures. They could recognize 47 different species by sight. They knew alien customs and laws and particular sensitivities. But how many of them had received equivalent training on human cultural diversity? The room remained completely silent. Danny looked around at his fellow officers and saw his own discomfort reflected in all their faces. Marcus continued explaining that humanity had made a fascinating mistake in its expansion into space. People became so focused on understanding aliens that they forgot they needed to understand themselves. They assumed that being human was a universal experience and that all humans navigated the world the same way, but that assumption had never been true in history. The first week focused entirely on historical context. Marcus brought in scholars and survivors from various chapters of human expansion into space. They heard from descendants of the original Martian colonies who described how early settlement patterns had recreated Earth's economic inequalities on a new world. They listened to refugees from outer rim colonies who explained how being sent to frontier worlds felt less like opportunity and more like forced exile. Danny found himself particularly affected by Dr. Susan Martinez, who was a sociologist that had spent 30 years studying human diaspora patterns across space. She explained something that hit Danny hard. Humanity did not leave prejudices behind when they left Earth. They packed those prejudices carefully and carried them to every new world they settled. The same patterns that created inequality on Earth recreated themselves on Mars and Europa and Titan and everywhere else humans went. The second week brought alien visitors to speak to the class. Ambassador Thrak spent an entire day describing what it was like to interact with humans as an outside observer. He told them that humans were contradictory beings. They spoke constantly of equality while treating their own people unequally. They preached unity while maintaining internal divisions. To an outside observer, human society appeared to be in constant conflict with its own stated values. Thrak leaned forward despite his massive size, somehow conveying gentleness. He said that in his years among humans he had learned something important. Humans aspired to ideals they had not yet achieved. This was not weakness, as some species might think. This was actually the source of humanity's greatest strength. Humans acknowledged the gap between what they were and what they wished to be. Then they worked constantly to close that gap. This quality was rare in the galaxy. The Velocian representative arrived in a special containment unit, since Velocians were pure energy beings. Its form pulsed with different colors as it communicated through a translator. It explained that Velocians did not have the human concept of race. All Velocians were energy differentiated only by individual consciousness. But they understood prejudice very well. They faced discrimination from species who saw them as lesser beings because they lacked physical form. Every species had its own blind spots. By the third week, the training shifted to practical scenarios. Marcus worked with a team of psychologists to create immersive simulations that put officers in complex situations requiring careful judgment. Danny found himself repeatedly placed in a recreation of his original encounter with Marcus Webb, but with important variations. Sometimes the person on the bench was genuinely hostile. Sometimes they were injured and needed help. Sometimes they were exactly what they appeared to be, which was someone who simply needed assistance rather than arrest. The scenarios forced Danny to look beyond his initial assumptions and gather more information before taking action. The most difficult simulation came during week 4. Danny responded to a report of suspicious behavior in a residential section. He found a young black woman arguing with a maintenance worker. Every instinct trained into Danny said this was a domestic dispute, or possibly criminal trespass. His training told him to separate them immediately, secure the situation, and verify everyone's identities. But this time Danny paused. He listened first before acting. It turned out the woman was the actual resident. The maintenance worker had entered her quarters without permission. She was rightfully angry about the invasion of her privacy. Had Danny followed his initial instinct to separate and restrain both parties, he would have essentially arrested the victim while siding with the person who had violated her space and her rights. When the simulation ended, Danny sat in the debriefing room with Marcus trying to process everything he had learned. He asked quietly how many times he had done exactly that in his career. How many times had he made completely wrong assumptions and never realized his mistake because no one had corrected him or complained? Marcus replied honestly, saying probably more times than Danny would want to know about, but that was exactly why they were doing this training program. Not to punish Danny for past mistakes, but to prevent future ones from happening. By week 5, the training expanded to include community members from the station. Marcus invited residents from various backgrounds to speak about their personal experiences with station security. Some people praised the officers and described positive interactions. Others described incidents where they had felt profiled or dismissed or treated as threats, rather than as legitimate residents. One elderly woman, originally from the outer colonies, described being stopped 14 times during her first year living on the station. Every single time, officers wanted to see her identification papers. Every time they questioned what she was doing in certain sections, as if she needed special permission to exist in those areas. She was a retired terraforming engineer who had helped build 3 different colonies. But to some officers, she was just a suspicious dark face that did not belong. Danny felt his face burn with shame as he listened. He had done exactly that to people multiple times without ever questioning whether his actions were truly justified. The final week focused on practical implementation. Marcus worked with each officer individually, reviewing their specific cases and developing personalized strategies for exercising better judgment. With Danny, he was particularly thorough and demanding. Marcus told Danny during their final session that he had good instincts. Danny was observant and appropriately cautious, and he genuinely wanted to help people. The problem had never been Danny's basic instincts. The problem was the filter through which those instincts operated. The training was giving Danny a new filter that accounted for more variables before jumping to conclusions. Danny asked if it would really be enough. Could training actually change how someone saw other people at a fundamental level? Marcus replied that training was just the beginning of a longer process. The real change would come from what Danny did with the training every single day. Every interaction would present a choice between old patterns and new awareness. Make enough right choices consistently, and eventually the new patterns would become natural instinct. Marcus stood to leave but paused at the door. He told Danny something important. He had not designed this program to absolve Danny of guilt or make him feel better about what happened. He designed it because he genuinely believed Danny was capable of becoming the kind of officer humanity desperately needed as they navigated an increasingly complex galaxy. Danny should not waste that potential. 6 months had passed since the arrest that changed everything. The protocols Marcus Webb established on New Horizons Station spread quickly through human space like ripples across water. What he created in response to his own arrest became a template that other stations and colonies adapted for their own use. The training program, initially seen as punishment for one officer's mistake, evolved into something far more significant. It became a fundamental reimagining of how humanity policed itself among the stars. Danny Carter walked through the corridors of New Horizons Station with completely different eyes than he had possessed 6 months earlier. He still saw the same crowds and the same mix of humans and aliens going about their daily business, but now he saw much deeper into situations. He noticed details he would have missed before. He questioned his initial assumptions more readily before taking any action. His patrol that evening took him through Section 7, which was the same corridor where he had arrested Marcus Webb. Danny paused at the bench where everything had happened. He stood there for a moment, reflecting on how much had changed in both his life and in the wider world. A voice called his name. Danny turned to find Marcus Webb approaching with several companions. Ambassador Thrak walked beside Marcus along with 2 other figures Danny did not immediately recognize. As they came closer, Danny realized they were representatives from the Arcturan and Velocian governments. Danny greeted Marcus respectfully and nodded to the alien delegates. Marcus said they had been hoping to find Danny and asked if he would walk with them. It was not really phrased as a question. Danny fell into step beside the group, feeling curious but also slightly nervous about what this impromptu meeting might mean. Marcus explained that the delegates wanted to meet Danny personally. They had heard extensive reports about the training program and wanted to see its results firsthand by speaking with someone who had completed it. The Arcturan delegate spoke first. Arcturans communicated through a combination of sounds and chemical signals that sophisticated equipment translated into human speech. The delegate said they had studied the incident that initiated all these reforms carefully. They wished to understand Danny's perspective now that 6 months had passed since the events occurred. Danny took a moment to gather his thoughts before responding. He explained that he had made assumptions based on incomplete information and prejudices he had not even realized he carried inside himself. The training had not just taught him about cultural diversity. More importantly, it taught him to recognize his own blind spots and to question his initial judgments before acting on them. The Velocian representative asked if this new approach had made Danny less effective as a security officer. Its energy form pulsed with genuine curiosity. Danny answered honestly, saying no. If anything, he had become more effective at his job. He made fewer mistakes now because he gathered more information before taking action. He had successfully diffused situations that might have escalated into violence because he took time to understand context, rather than just blindly enforcing rules. Thrak made the grinding sound that indicated Krell approval. He said this aligned with observations the Krell had been making. They had been monitoring security incidents on New Horizons Station carefully. Complaints filed against officers had decreased by 63% since the new training was implemented. Use of force incidents had decreased by 47%. These were very significant improvements that could not be ignored. Marcus added that, more importantly, reports of residents feeling safe and respected had increased substantially. That was the real measure of success in his opinion. Security was not just about preventing crime and catching criminals. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt they genuinely belonged and were valued. They walked in silence for a few moments, passing through the station's main commercial district. Danny noticed things he might have completely missed before the training. The easy interaction between different species. The lack of tension that had once seemed normal, but was actually a sign of underlying problems. The Arcturan delegate spoke again, saying that humanity fascinated their species greatly. Humans were capable of recognizing their own failures and adapting to become better. This capacity was extremely rare among intelligent species. Most species, including the Arcturans themselves, tended to justify mistakes rather than learn from them in any meaningful way. Danny replied that he was not sure humanity deserved that much credit. They were still learning and still making mistakes every single day. The Velocian representative observed that learning from mistakes was exactly what mattered most. Perfection was impossible for any species that had ever existed, but improvement and adaptation and growth were achievable goals. Humanity demonstrated this capacity remarkably well compared to most species in the galaxy. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face Danny directly. He said the reason they were all here tonight was to inform Danny of something important. His training program was now being adopted by 17 other major stations and colony worlds throughout human space. The Galactic Trade Assembly had formally recommended that all member species review their own law enforcement protocols, using this program as a model. Danny felt his breath catch in his throat. He stammered that this was not his program at all. Marcus had created everything. Marcus corrected him, saying he had created only the basic framework. Danny and his fellow officers had proved the framework actually worked in practice. Their willingness to acknowledge mistakes and commit to genuine improvement gave the program credibility that no amount of theory could provide. Without that human element, it would have been just another academic exercise that nobody took seriously. Thrak placed one massive claw very gently on Danny's shoulder. He quoted a Krell saying, "The warrior who learns from defeat is more valuable than the warrior who has never lost a battle." Danny Carter had become valuable. As the group dispersed, Marcus lingered behind with Danny. They stood together at the bench where everything had started 6 months ago. Danny said he had been meaning to ask Marcus something. That night when Danny arrested him, Marcus could have identified himself immediately. He could have pulled rank and shown who he really was. That would have avoided the entire situation. Why had Marcus not done that? Marcus smiled slightly. He explained that he knew something Danny did not know at the time. Marcus recognized that this uncomfortable moment had the potential to teach lessons that could not be learned any other way. If Marcus had used his position and authority to avoid arrest, Danny would have learned that important people did not have to follow the same rules as everyone else. That was exactly the wrong lesson for anyone to learn. Danny asked if Marcus had let himself be arrested on purpose then. Marcus said not exactly. He had not planned any of it. But once the arrest started happening, Marcus recognized the opportunity it presented. Sometimes the universe handed you a teaching moment. The wise thing to do was let that moment play out fully. Danny shook his head in amazement, calling Marcus a remarkable man. Marcus replied that he was just an old man who had seen enough of human history to know something important. Progress came from uncomfortable moments, not from comfortable ones. Danny had given Marcus an extremely uncomfortable moment. Marcus simply chose to use it productively, rather than destructively. Marcus turned to leave but paused with one more thing to say. Commander Brooks had told him that Danny was being considered for promotion to training instructor. Danny would help implement the new protocols throughout the entire sector. Marcus had recommended Danny highly for that position. Danny said he did not know what to say to that. Marcus told him to say he would do the job well. Say he would remember that every officer trained would go on to make countless judgments affecting countless lives. Say he would teach them not just the rules but the wisdom to know when rules served justice and when rules obscured it. Danny promised he would do exactly that. As Marcus walked away into the corridor, Danny remained at the bench contemplating his strange journey. 6 months ago, this spot had represented his greatest mistake and the potential end of his career. Now it represented the beginning of something far more important, a genuine effort to make humanity's expansion into space more just and more thoughtful, and more worthy of the ideals they claimed to uphold. 2 years after the incident on New Horizon Station, Marcus Webb sat in a comfortable chair in his modest apartment on Earth, watching news feeds from across human space. The story that started with his arrest had grown into something he had never quite anticipated, though he had certainly hoped for good outcomes. The Webb protocols, as they were now called, had become standard training across all human-controlled space. More than 200,000 security officers had completed the comprehensive program. Dozens of academic papers analyzed its effectiveness from different angles. 3 major conferences had been held discussing implementation across different alien cultures. But Marcus was not watching the news because of his own accomplishments or recognition. He was watching because today marked a significant milestone. The first class was graduating from the Advanced Interspecies Justice Academy, which was a new institution, founded in the wake of reforms he had initiated. Among the graduating officers was Danny Carter, who had not only completed his instructor certification, but had become one of the program's most effective advocates throughout human space. Marcus watched as Danny addressed the assembled graduates. His words carried weight earned through hard personal experience. Danny began by telling the crowd that 2 years ago, he had made a mistake that should have ended his career permanently. He arrested a man for the crime of being tired and black in what Danny perceived as the wrong place at the wrong time. That man could have destroyed Danny professionally with a single word. Instead, he taught Danny something invaluable. Justice without wisdom was just rules enforcement. Rules enforcement without context often created injustice rather than preventing it. Danny paused, looking out at the diverse faces before him in the audience. He told them that all of them were about to take positions of authority on stations and colonies throughout human space. They would interact daily with dozens of species. They would navigate extremely complex cultural situations. They would make split-second decisions that could save lives or ruin them completely. The training they received here was designed to help them make better decisions than Danny had made that night. But Danny wanted them to understand something crucial. This training was not a simple checklist. It was not a set of rules that, if followed precisely, would always produce the right outcome. It was a framework for thinking and for questioning your own assumptions. It was for recognizing that every situation was far more complex than it first appeared. Danny gestured to the alien dignitaries seated in the audience. Representatives from the Krell and Volosians and Arcturans sat alongside delegates from a dozen other species. He said their alien friends had been extremely generous in sharing their own experiences and perspectives. They had taught humanity that struggling with internal prejudice was not unique to humans. Every species had its own blind spots and historical divisions and challenges with fairness. What made humanity special was not that they had overcome these challenges. What made them special was their commitment to the ongoing struggle. In his apartment, Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. This young man, who had once seen only a suspicious vagrant sitting on a bench, now understood something profound about justice and humanity. The transformation was everything Marcus had hoped to achieve. The broadcast cut to an interview with Ambassador Thrak, who had become an unexpected champion of the web protocols within the Galactic Trade Assembly. Thrak told the interviewer that what humans accomplished was truly remarkable. They took a moment of deep shame and transformed it into an opportunity for genuine growth. They acknowledged their failings publicly before the entire galaxy. They worked systematically to address those failings. They invited everyone else to learn from their process. This was the humanity the Krell chose to ally with. This was the humanity worth befriending. The interviewer asked a question many had wondered about. The Krell were known as warriors, and as a species that valued strength above everything else. Yet Thrak spoke admirably of humanity acknowledging weakness. How did he reconcile this apparent contradiction? Thrak's mandibles clicked in what Marcus recognized as the Krell expression of deep thought. He explained that there was no contradiction at all. True strength was not the absence of weakness. True strength was the courage to acknowledge weakness openly and work relentlessly to overcome it. Humanity demonstrated this strength constantly. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the most technologically advanced, but they might be the most honest with themselves about their own limitations. That honesty made them formidable. Marcus turned off the news feed and walked to his window, looking out over the city lights of New Chicago. Earth had changed so dramatically during his lifetime. When he was born, humanity was still confined to a single world. They were still struggling with ancient prejudices that seemed completely insurmountable. Now humans lived on hundreds of worlds. They interacted routinely with dozens of alien species. They were slowly and painfully learning to be better than their difficult past. His communication console chimed with an incoming call from Commander Brooks on New Horizon Station. Marcus smiled and accepted the connection. Brooks greeted him warmly, hoping he was not interrupting anything important. Marcus said not at all. He had just been watching the Academy graduation ceremony. Young Danny Carter had done extremely well. Brooks agreed and said that was actually part of why he was calling. The Colonial Administration had made a formal request. They wanted the web protocols expanded to include civilian populations, not just security forces. They wanted to develop community-based versions of the training for schools and businesses, and even family education programs. Marcus felt a surge of hope at hearing this. He said the proposal was certainly ambitious. Brooks agreed it was ambitious. Then he said they wanted Marcus to lead the entire development effort personally. Brooks knew Marcus was retired and valued his privacy. But this could become his greatest legacy, not just reforming law enforcement, but helping humanity create a culture that truly lived up to its highest ideals. Marcus considered the offer carefully. He was old and tired and had certainly earned his rest. But the opportunity to shape humanity's development at such a fundamental level was extremely hard to refuse. He told Brooks to give him 1 week to think about it seriously. This was not the kind of decision he made lightly or quickly, Brooks said, of course. But he wanted Marcus to know something important. 2 years ago, when Danny Carter arrested Marcus, Brooks thought they were facing a complete disaster. He was ready to sacrifice Danny's career to save the station's reputation. Marcus saw something different in that moment. He saw an opportunity to make real lasting change instead of just performing damage control. Everything they had accomplished since then started with that choice Marcus made. After the call ended, Marcus returned to his window. Down in the streets below, he could see people going about their evening routines. Humans of every possible background moving freely through a city that had once been deeply segregated by law. The progress was real even if incomplete. He thought about Danny Carter and Ambassador Thrack and all the people whose lives had been touched by that single incident on New Horizons Station. He thought about tens of thousands of officers now trained in better methods. He thought about millions of residents who moved through human space with greater confidence and fair treatment. One arrest, one uncomfortable moment, one decision to transform shame into education rather than revenge. From those small seeds, something significant had grown across the galaxy. Marcus had spent his entire life administering justice and interpreting law and shaping policy. But this felt fundamentally different. This felt like he had finally moved beyond simply judging humanity's conflicts. He was actually helping them evolve past the need for so much judgment. He made his decision about the colonial administration's offer. He would accept it. Not because he wanted more work or recognition, but because the work mattered deeply. Humanity's expansion into space had been in many ways their chance to start completely fresh. A chance to build something better than what they created on Earth. They had stumbled often in that effort. They carried old prejudices to new worlds. They recreated ancient inequalities on fresh soil, but they had also demonstrated something remarkable. The ability to recognize failures honestly and work to correct them systematically. That night, Marcus composed his response to Commander Brooks accepting the position. As he wrote, he thought about all the young people who would be shaped by these new programs, all the communities that would benefit from better understanding, all the potential conflicts that might be avoided through education rather than resolved through punishment. One elderly man sitting on a bench in a corridor, arrested for the crime of existing while tired and black. From such a small indignity and such an everyday injustice had come an opportunity to make humanity genuinely better. It was not the legacy Marcus had imagined when he retired from the bench, but it was perhaps the one he had been working toward his entire life. A humanity that questioned itself honestly, a humanity that acknowledged failings openly, a humanity that worked relentlessly to close the gap between its ideals and its reality.